Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's last post ceremony. My name is Craig Burrell, and joining us today from the Royal Australian Air Force is Flight Lieutenant Harrison Leonard. Today marks the 80th anniversary of the beginning of the Battle of the Coral Sea. Fought from the 4th to the 8th of May 1942, it was a pivotal action in the Pacific War. Although the battle itself consisted largely of a duel between Japanese and American aircraft carriers, two Australian ships, HMAS Australia and HMAS Hobart, were with the American-led fleet and helped fend off attacks by Japanese aircraft. Two Royal Australian Air Force Catalina flying boats were also lost over the Coral Sea on the 4th of May, shot down by Japanese aircraft. The Japanese and American navies each lost one aircraft carrier during the fighting, but ultimately the Japanese fleet withdrew. A Japanese invasion flotilla bound for Port Moresby also turned back after being deprived of carrier-based air support. The Battle of the Coral Sea broke a sequence of seemingly unstoppable Japanese conquests in the Southeast Asia and the Pacific. American General Douglas MacArthur said that the Allied victory in the Coral Sea undoubtedly saved Australia from a definite and immediate threat. While this might have been an overstatement, it is true that if Port Moresby had fallen to the Japanese, it would have strengthened their hold on New Guinea and further isolated the Australian mainland. It is also likely that enemy air raids along the Queensland coast would have become commonplace. The battle was not only the first aircraft carrier battle, but also the first sea battle in which the opposing capital ships did not fire at or even see one another. In fact, the main fleets did not come within 100 kilometres of each other. These actions foreshadowed the epic aircraft battle at Midway the following month. Defeated in the Coral Sea, the Japanese forces now attempted to seize Port Moresby by the overland route. This led to the iconic events of the Kokoda Trail campaign, fought from July to November 1942. The Battle of the Coral Sea has come to symbolise the enduring alliance and close friendship between Australia and the United States, as both nations were united in the same purpose, defending our shared values and beliefs. We warmly welcome the family of Flying Officer Allan Leslie Norman, whose story will be told shortly. We're honoured to acknowledge Group Captain Bruce Chandler, retired, representing the Air Force Association. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that love and support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL and Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria, and RSL Queensland, who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection by visitors to the memorial and students on behalf of the following school: from Victoria, Christchurch Grammar School. If you're able, please stand and join in singing the National Anthem.
Australians, oh, let us rejoice, for we are one and free, with golden soil and wealth for toil. Our home is good by sea. Our land abounds in nature's gifts of beauty, rich and rare. In history's page, let every stage advance Australia
Please be seated if you can do so. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn their loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the hearts of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight, we will read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and on operations for more than a century. But first, we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the pool of reflection.
Today, we remember and pay tribute to Flying Officer Allan Leslie Norman. Allan Norman was born on the 29th of December 1915 in Hindmarsh, South Australia. Affectionately known as Snowy, he was the eldest of two children born to Clerk Stanley Norman and his wife Ethel. Allan grew up around the suburb of Torrensville, where his family owned a vineyard. He received his early education at Underdale Primary School and later attended Pulteney Grammar School in Adelaide, where he enjoyed playing cricket and football. From an early age, Allan was fascinated by aircraft and flying, often watching planes taking off and landing from nearby Parafield Airport. As a young adult, he gained employment changing and repairing batteries for a local engineering firm before taking up work with automotive company Duncan & Co., where he worked as a stores assistant. Shortly after the outbreak of the Second World War, Allan married his sweetheart, Una Constance Rodder, on the 27th of January 1940. After a few months with his new wife, Allan Norman enlisted in the Royal Australian Air Force on the 29th of April. He began training at Parafield, where he had grown up watching planes as a boy. He later travelled to Point Cook in Victoria, where he began specialising in reconnaissance duties. In early December, Norman travelled to the RAF base at Rathmines and learned to pilot seaplanes, gaining his first taste of flying. Norman completed his training at the end of 1940 and in March the following year joined the ranks of Number 11 Squadron. Based at Rabaul in eastern New Britain, Number 11 Squadron flew seaplanes and carried out routine patrols and bombing attacks against Japanese shipping and other targets. Norman learned to fly Catalina flying boats and was appointed to a commission in June 1941. In August, he was transferred to the newly formed Number 20 Squadron, flying out of Queensland, and began seaward patrols clearing Japanese vessels from Australian waters. Though he had been trained to undertake reconnaissance duties, Flying Officer Norman eventually began captaining night bombing missions on Japanese ships and bases, accumulating almost 600 hours of operational flying. By April 1942, the Japanese had set their sights on Port Moresby. They began heavy attacks on the region in early May, and Number 20 Squadron became engaged in reconnaissance and night raids in response. On the 4th of May, the opening day of the Battle of the Coral Sea, Norman was captain of a 9-man crew which took off on reconnaissance mission between New Guinea and Solomon Islands. Shortly after becoming airborne, their Catalina was attacked by enemy fighters, eventually causing the aircraft to crash into the sea. The crew successfully bailed out of the wreck and into rubber dinghies when they were picked up by a Japanese destroyer, becoming prisoners of war. With no information about the fate of Norman and his crew, it was presumed that they had crashed into the sea and lost their lives on the 4th of May, 1942. Several months after his presumed death, Norman was mentioned in dispatches. His citation noted, "On all occasions, he has pressed home his bombing attacks with vigour despite adverse weather conditions and the presence of enemy fighters. Due to the fact that he was originally trained for general reconnaissance, the high standard he attained as a captain of a night bombing aircraft is all the more commendable." It wasn't until August 1950 that searches near Rabaul uncovered the graves of Norman and his crew, all of whom had been executed in November 1942. A RAF official letter wrote to Norman's parents to provide the details of their son's last moments. He said, "It had been known for some time that a large number of prisoners had been killed by the Japanese Navy at Matupi near Rabaul, but until this recent discovery, it was not known that any member of your son's crew was amongst them." After their execution, a Japanese officer addressed his men and spoke of the fearless manner in which all of the prisoners met their deaths. He said he hoped the Japanese would be prepared to die for their country as bravely as their enemy had done. It is realised that your sorrow in the loss of a gallant son will be added to by the fact that he was the victim of a crime against all laws of welfare and humanity. But it is considered that you would desire to know the true facts. On the 18th of July, 1950, Flying Officer Allan Norman and his crew were given a military funeral and laid to rest at Rabaul Bitapaka War Cemetery. Flying Officer Allan Norman was 26 years old. His name is listed on the Roll of Honour on my left, among almost 40,000 Australians who died while serving in the Second World War. His photograph is displayed today by the Pool of Reflection. This is but one of the many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Flying Officer Allan Leslie Norman, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them. Lest we forget.
We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Poziere or in the low scrub at Gallipoli with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes the last post ceremony. On behalf of the Director and staff, thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial today and for your continued support during the Memorial's development project. We wish you all a very pleasant evening.